I'll see you all in hell, Louis, remember that.
I was not there.
This is George Geweld Thomas, who's facing 52 charges, including 7 murders, 3 attempted murders, racketeering, the unlawful possession of firearms and ammunition, housebreaking with intent to rob, and robbery with aggravating circumstances, and several gang-related charges in Cape Town, South Africa. George Thomas and 2 other gang members were arrested in 2008 after a shooting incident in Bishop Lavis. Thomas was allegedly found in possession of a rifle fitted with a telescopic sight and silencer. At the same time, his accomplices had a box of ammunition to accompany the rifle. Thomas was the leader of the Notorious 28's gang and was involved in a gang war with their rivals, Clever Kid and the 26's gang. Tragically, innocent lives were lost during these violent encounters. Marvin Esterhuizen, Curtis's brother, was mistakenly killed in a shooting on November 23, 2008. Curtis Esterhuizen, a gangster from the rival Clever Kids gang, survived a point-blank shooting in November 2009. However horrible Thomas's crimes were, his gang and his behavior and actions in court were even more shocking. During the trial at a high court in Cape Town, not only did Thomas put up a show, laughing, making finger signs, and turning everything into a joke.
Hello? Hello?
But behind closed doors, Thomas and the 28s were doing everything they could to prevent him from being sentenced. The state had a staggering 370 witnesses lined up, some of whom are under witness protection due to threats received. In fact, in the 4 years the trial took to complete, 12 state witnesses were murdered, and there were 27 more attempted murders. The 28's plan was to murder anyone who testified against their leader. "If I talk, I will get shot," one state witness explained. After a long and intense trial, Thomas was sentenced to 175 years in jail. He showed no remorse as his sentence was delivered.
Gonna be brutally honest. I'm not saying I regret it because my whole life shaped the person that I am today. But what I know for a fact, if I could have changed some things, I wouldn't be here where I'm now.
However cold-hearted Thomas's crimes and courtroom reaction was, nothing could prepare you for the infamous case of John Gotti. Known as the Dapper Don and Teflon Don, who's facing charges for multiple crimes and gang-related activities in New York. Gotti was an infamous American gangster and the boss of the Gambino crime family in New York City. Born into poverty, Gotti and his brothers turned to a life of crime from an early age. He quickly rose through the ranks of the Gambino family, becoming a protege of underboss Agnello Della Croce and operating out of Queens. Gotti's criminal activities were not limited to traditional mafia practices. He and his crew faced FBI indictments for drug trafficking, which led Gotti to fear for his life at the hands of then-boss Paul Castellano. In response, Gotti orchestrated the murder of Castellano, seizing control of the Gambino family and cementing his position as one of the most powerful and dangerous crime bosses in the United States. Known for his flamboyant style and outspoken personality, Gotti gained favor with the public and the media.
He made the public fall in love with him. The guy was great. He was a master at it.
Despite facing multiple trials in the 1980s, Gotti seemed untouchable, earning the nickname Teflon Don after being acquitted each time.
We find him not guilty.
However, it was later revealed that these trials were tainted by jury tampering and witness intimidation. Gotti's right-hand man, Salvatore Gravano, better known as Sammy the Bull, later confessed to the meticulous measures he took during the ongoing proceedings to locate and intimidate every witness and jury member involved.
You actually got to a juror in one of his trials, didn't you?
I got to every trial he had. Either I got to jurors or I got to witnesses. I got to everybody in all of his trials.
Only years later, in a stunning turn of events, Sammy the Bull not only breached the trust placed in him by Gotti, but also testified against him, presenting compelling evidence of their joint involvement in numerous murders. This shocking act of betrayal ultimately unraveled Gotti's criminal empire and led to his downfall.
I have been in jail since December of 1990, when I was arrested with John Gotti. I was his underboss and second of command of the Gambino family. In December of 1995, John Gotti, along with some others, murdered Paul Castellano. As part of my deal with the government, I pleaded guilty to a charge that has a 20-year maximum sentence rather than the life sentence that I was facing if convicted at trial. As part of my cooperation, I told the government about my life of crimes, including the fact that I participated in 19 murders.
In 1992, Gotti received a life sentence without parole and was sent to the United States Penitentiary in Marion.
The crime boss, John Gotti, has been sentenced to life in prison with no parole.
However shocking you think Gotti's case was, this wasn't the only time detectives managed to put a merciless killer behind bars. There was also the case of Lee Rios, who's facing charges for murder in Massachusetts, USA. In 2015, Lee Rios and Jonathan Guevara, both members of the Latin Kings street gang, murdered 18-year-old Kenneth Lopez in 2015. The murder was strictly ego-driven. Wait till you hear why Rios believed he had to kill Lopez.
Mr. Lopez lost his life because he had hit on Mr. Rios' ex-girlfriend and because he showed him disrespect.
Rios lured Lopez out of his house, where the two of them shared a cab, to the area where Lopez would ultimately lose his life. When the two arrived, they were met by 3 Latin Kings gang members. The Assistant District Attorney, Max Bennett, informed the court that Rios discharged a total of 5 shots, with 4 of them striking Lopez, including 2 shots to the head. As if his actions weren't terrible enough, Rios' behavior in court was less than desirable. He remained aloof and uninterested in the proceedings. Rios denied the charge in court when it was brought before Springfield District Court. Still, eventually, the case made its way to Hampton Superior Court for further proceedings. Rios was convicted of first-degree murder by a jury and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole.
As to count 1, jury having convicted you of murder in the first degree, sir, I'm sentencing you to MCIC junction for the term of your life without the possibility of parole.
Rios' cold demeanor and lack of remorse shows that he is lost in the gangster life. However, he's not the only gangster currently sitting behind bars. We also have the disturbing case of Victor Rodas, who's facing charges for murder in Bedford County, Virginia. Victor Rodas is a member of the dreaded MS-13 gang. Rodas lured 17-year-old Raymond Wood from his home under the pretense of a drug deal involving marijuana. What happens next is shocking.
Lured Wood out of his home, abducted him, and drove to Bedford County. And other members used a knife to cut Wood's throat, cut off his right hand, and stab him in the chest and stomach 27 times.
Wood and Rodas knew each other because Wood used to sell marijuana to Rodas. In court, the prosecution argued that threats were exchanged between the two via text messages in the days leading up to the murder. On the other hand, the defense's stance is that Rodas picked Wood up willingly and dropped him off without knowing what would happen next. They claim that Rodas had no participation in the stabbing death and instead he was merely a bystander. Watch as Rodas' attorney argues exactly that in the courtroom.
This offender did not necessarily have a hands-on role with the victimization and death of Raymond Wood.
The defense attorney even suggests that Rodas was afraid of another alleged gang member named Correas Ventura, who supposedly ordered Rodas to drive the car that night. Rodas was one of the 5 MS-13 gang members charged with first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 55 years in prison and showed no reaction. Everyone agrees that Rodas got what he deserved. However, this wasn't the only time a gangster got a sentence that felt like justice. There was the case of the notorious Young Thug, who was facing charges for attempted murder and participating in criminal street gang activity in Atlanta, Georgia. Young Thug is an American rapper with a career spanning over a decade. He's collaborated with notable artists like Drake, Chris Brown, and Travis Scott, gaining recognition for many of his songs. On May 9, 2022, Young Thug was arrested. The arrest was part of a larger grand jury indictment involving 28 members and associates of his record label, YSL Records. The 56-count indictment alleged violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act, including murder, attempted murder, robbery, assault, drug dealing, and witness intimidation. Prosecutors pointed to Young Thug's lyrics as evidence of gang affiliation and racketeering activity. Songs like Anybody and tracks from the album Slime Language 2 were cited as examples. Lyrics from Anybody included the line, "I never killed anybody, but I got something to do with that body." The indictment characterized YSL as a criminal street gang and highlighted numerous instances of gang activity. Young Thug himself faces up to 25 years in prison. However violent Young Thug and his gangs were, another gang in Colorado led by Abel Gallegos was equally as devastating. Abel Gallegos, Rene Rosales, and Alonso Quintana, who are facing charges for murder in Golden, Colorado. The three gang members are in court for the murder of 28-year-old Simone Duran. In 2018, Duran found herself in a dangerous situation after identifying Quintana in a lineup in an attempted murder investigation conducted in Adams County. As a result, she was targeted by the gang. Gallegos initiated contact with Duran through social media and arranged to meet with Rosales and others at a residence in Denver. Subsequently, Duran, Gallegos, and Rosales departed together, with Rosales returning home later. Gallegos took Duran to a parking lot located at West Colfax and Kipling, where Quintana joined them. According to authorities, Quintana and Gallegos brutally assaulted Duran and put her in the back seat of a vehicle. They then drove her to a secluded and shadowy area at 7th and Nile in Golden, where they callously shot her 10 times. Later, Gallegos and Rosales returned to the scene of the crime, dousing Duran's lifeless body in gasoline before setting it ablaze. Following investigations by the police, the three men were arrested and charged to court. Abel Gallegos, age 36, was sentenced to life in prison plus 163 years. Rene Rosales, age 36, received a prison sentence of 150 years. Alonso Quintana, age 28, was sentenced to life in prison plus 160 years. Judge Philip McNulty also expressed profound dismay at the nonchalant nature of the crime and the complete disregard for human life.
This was a horrific crime. I am struck by the casualness in which it was committed, the absolute disregard for human life.
The gangsters showed no signs of remorse as he was led out of the courtroom. However bad you think Abel Gallegos' gangster case was, it probably doesn't compare to the heartbreaking case in Michigan. This time, the gangsters were led by Kenneth Hill. Accompanying Kenneth is Jamar Robinson and Darius Diaz-Gaskin, who are facing multiple charges, including murder in Michigan. The gangsters attacked Basim Sulaka, the Moonlight Party store owner. The attack lasted only 1 minute and 44 seconds and occurred on March 28, 2014. Surveillance footage from the store showed Diaz-Gaskin, Robinson, and another individual, Clinton Grayson, entering the store. Within 20 seconds, Sulaka was shot in the back with Diaz-Gaskin's handgun. Sulaka, a peaceful man who did not keep a gun at his store, was known for his kindness towards his customers and employees. The trial was an emotional one for the victim's family. Vivian Sulaka, the victim's sister, had a chance to address the men that took her brother's life.
To the killers who murdered my brother in cold blood, I say this to you. You're an absolute disgrace to the human race. I hope that while you spent the rest of your life in prison, you actually reflect on the awful decisions you've made in your life.
However, this is where things get crazy, because right after Vivian said this to the killers, Jamar Robinson hinted that she was next by saying, "This ain't over yet." Court Judge Mary Cherzanowski heard these comments and demanded an explanation.
What more could you possibly want to take from this family, yet insult them and threaten them and say, "This ain't over yet"? What does that mean?
After 2 days of deliberation, a jury has found 3 men guilty of murder. They were sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. We often hear about gangsters claiming the life of rival gang members or innocent members of society. However, the leader of the Rollin' 30s Crips, Sean Denzel Garant, showed us gangsters also aren't afraid of killing their own. Also known as Dank, Dink, and Harlem Dank, Sean Garant is facing charges for several crimes, including conspiracy to commit murder in aid of racketeering and conspiracy to murder a different victim. The murder in question involved the death of 17-year-old Nicholas Lee in 2017. As the Rollin' 30s Crips leader in Roanoke, Garant recruited members into the gang operating primarily in northwest Roanoke. The gang was involved in various criminal activities, including drug distribution, acts of violence, and firearms trafficking, murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. According to sources, Garant ordered a new recruit, Nicholas Lee, to kill another gang member, Desmond Florence, for his perceived disloyalty to the gang. However, Lee failed to carry out the order. Gang leader Garant took this as a sign of perceived disloyalty to the gang. So, what did Dank do? he ordered the co-defendants Trayvon Raycron Casey, Chauncey Dion Levacy, and DeMonte Rashad Mack to kill him. Fast forward to the early hours of June 15, 2017. Nicholas is ordered to hand over his gun to Mack. When Nicholas refused, Mack pointed his own firearm at Nicholas and told him to give it up. After handing over his firearm to Casey, Nick ran away in an attempt to escape, but both Casey and Mack chased him and ultimately shot Nicholas Lee twice in the back and killed him. When Guerrant got to court, he showed no remorse. Ultimately, he pled guilty to the charges that were faced against him and was sentenced to 37 years in prison. Guerrant was not happy to hear he was to spend 37 years behind bars. However, this wasn't the first time gang members refused to apologize for the crimes, like in the case of Antonio Davenport and Lil Tony. Anthony Nathaniel Davenport Jr., also known as Little Tony, and Derek Lamont Dixon Jr., also known as Smack, were facing charges for murder in Greensboro, North Carolina. Both men were members of the 8-Trey Gangster Crip Gang. They engaged in various criminal activities, including shootings targeting rival gang members, drug trafficking, bank fraud, and witness intimidation. Davenport was also part of a rap group called 83 Babies, which promoted gang life, gun violence, and drug distribution through their music. The incident leading to the murder began when rival gang members assaulted Davenport at a mall in Durham on August 14, 2019, and posted a video of the assault on Instagram.
Take his chain, take his chain. Take his chain. Come on.
Seeking revenge, Davenport and Dixon conspired with other gang members, including Deval Naiji Magwood, also known as Paco, to retaliate. On August 18, 2019, Davenport, Dixon, and Magwood drove to an area frequented by rival gang members and identified a car he believed belonged to the rival gang that jumped him. However, Lil Tony would later find out that the car did not belong to the rival gang. Instead, it was carrying 9-year-old Zion Person, his aunt, and 2 other cousins.
But I didn't know they were shooting at me. Once I heard another gunshot, it hit my back window. So my kids like, auntie, mommy, go.
Davenport and Dixon opened fire on the car, firing multiple rounds and fatally shooting Zion Person in the head. Zion's 8-year-old cousin, who was also in the car, was shot in the forearm, but thankfully survived the shooting. Davenport was wearing a court-ordered ankle monitor at the time, and its location data placed him at the murder scene and Dixon's and Magwood's home before and after the shooting. Surveillance footage captured Davenport's car following the victim's car just before the shooting. Davenport attempted to conceal evidence by painting his car black shortly after the murder. A 9mm handgun linked forensically to the murder was recovered from Davenport's girlfriend's car. Dixon pled guilty on May 11, 2021 to conspiracy to commit acts of racketeering and murder in aid of racketeering in federal court. The gangsters were sentenced to life imprisonment. They showed no remorse and kept denying their involvement in the crime. Davenport and Lil Smack's denial and lack of remorse suggest that they are more loyal to the gang than to human life. However, there is the case of Caius Viovis, who's facing multiple charges, including murder in Massachusetts. Viovis, who has 666 tattoos and 2 rows of horns on his forehead, corroborated with Hell's Angels members Adam Lee Hall and David Chalyu to murder 3 men with an instrument resembling a machete and chopped up their bodies. The victims, David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. Their remains were buried on private property in Beckett. Viovis and his crew murdered the men to eliminate witnesses and prevent Glasser from testifying in another case. As if his crimes were not bad enough, Viovis's actions in court were even more horrific.
Isolation for 3 years now. I refused to talk to the cops. I've turned down all numerous plea deals offered me from the beginning.
During the trial, an employee at Home Depot testified as a witness, recalling how Viovis had come to the store looking to buy saws. His distinct appearance caught the worker's attention, who later remembered Viovis purchasing the tools, unaware of the sinister plans they would be used for. The jury deliberated for 4 days before delivering their guilty verdict, and Viovis didn't take it well. He yelled at the jury and cursed them.
I'll see you all in hell, Louis, remember that.
During the sentencing, he claimed he was innocent. Viovis was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole.
As to each of the 3 counts of murder, impose a sentence of life in prison without the possibility.
His accomplices also received the same sentence. Viovis oversaw the murder of witnesses. However, this wasn't the only time that a gangster had been responsible for several murders. There's the case of Miguel Alvarez Flores and Diego Hernandez Rivera, who are facing charges for murder and kidnapping in Houston, Texas. On February 16, 2017, a 15-year-old Genesis Cornejo Alvarado was tragically found dead, shot, and abandoned in the middle of a road. She had been missing for a whole month before her body was discovered. Following investigations, Miguel Alvarez Flores and Diego Hernandez Rivera, two members of the notorious MS-13 gang and acclaimed Satanists, were arrested. Shockingly, a 14-year-old girl reported that she too had fallen victim to Alvarez and Hernandez's evil plans. She testified that after running away from school, the gangsters kidnapped her, molested her, and forced her to ingest drugs during her terrifying month-long confinement in their apartment. As if their crimes weren't disgusting enough, the gangsters' behavior in court was even more sickening. During their trial, Alvarez and Hernandez decided to put on quite the show for the cameras. They laughed and waved as if it was all some twisted joke. Alvarez and Hernandez were charged with murder and aggravated kidnapping. They both pleaded guilty to the murder of Genesis Cornejo Alvarado. On May 26, 2021, they were sentenced to 40 years behind bars. Hernandez got an extra 12 years for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Alvarez and Hernandez's reaction might suggest that they're cold-hearted. However, this wasn't the only time a gangster reacted emotionlessly to their sentence. There is the case of Nicholas Lindsay, who's facing charges for murder in Florida. Nicholas Lindsay had a troubled past, with prior records for nonviolent offenses such as grand theft and trespassing. Despite attending school on the day of the shooting, he had missed 40 days throughout the school year. Interestingly, his interactions with authority figures at school seemed relatively compliant, but his Facebook page displayed a gang name. On February 21, 2011, Officer David Crawford responded to a call about a suspicious person near Tropicana Field. Arriving at the scene, Crawford encountered the individual and stepped out of his vehicle. Unfortunately, an exchange of gunfire occurred. Officer Crawford was shot multiple times at close range while reaching for a notepad. The community was shaken, and a massive manhunt involving over 200 officers from various agencies was launched to capture the suspect. The manhunt finally ended on the night of February 22, 2011, when 16-year-old Nicholas Lindsay was apprehended. Initially, he provided inconsistent accounts of the events.
I was not there.
Eventually, he confessed to information that aligned with the evidence gathered by the police. Lindsay even broke down and cried during the confession, admitting to disposing of the gun in a nearby creek. Lindsay's mother, Deneen Sweat, had suspicions about her son's involvement in the shooting and encouraged him to come forward and tell the truth.
I told my son, man up and tell what happened.
Eventually, she was present with him when he confessed to the police. On March 19, 2012, Lindsay was convicted of the murder and received a life sentence. He showed no remorse. If you thought these reactions were shocking, you'd be amazed at this video of dangerous killers who wanted the death penalty.